The air hung thick and heavy, saturated with the scent of decaying lum moss. A sickly yellow tinge, the emerald blight, crept across the giant, veined leaves that sheltered the human settlement, a creeping stain against the vibrant bioluminescence that was their lifeblood. Noah wiped the sweat stinging his eyes, leaving a smear of grime across his cheek. The lum moss, adapted to power their makeshift generators, was dying, and with it, their hope. He stared across the chasm, the network of bioluminescent vines pulsing weakly, a skeletal mockery of their former brilliance. Ethel, once a paradise, was succumbing. His stomach twisted, the familiar pang of guilt surfacing. He had left Earth, a promising young botanist eager to explore the galaxy while his family remained. Then the plague hit. Now, staring at this dying alien world, he felt the echo of that loss, the same helpless despair. He wouldn't fail again. Noah returned to his makeshift lab, a salvaged hydroponics bay repurposed to study Ethel's silicon-based flora. He had to find a solution, something within this alien ecosystem, something he could adapt, manipulate, something to save them. He adjusted the spectral analyzer, the hum a constant companion against the encroaching silence. The samples of infected lum moss glowed with a ghastly luminescence under the scanner, their cellular structure dissolving. A flicker of movement at the edge of the platform caught his eye. He turned sharply, hand instinctively reaching for the antiquated pulse pistol clipped to his belt. Standing amidst the giant ferns, partially obscured by the shimmering mist, was a figure unlike any he'd seen before. Skin that shimmered with iridescent colors, like captured starlight, eyes large and luminous, shifting from emerald to sapphire as she watched him. Her hair, woven from what looked like living vines, cascaded down her back, blending seamlessly with the surrounding foliage. An aethery. Fear warred with fascination. They were a myth, a whisper in the jungle winds, spoken of with reverence and fear. The keepers of Ethel's secrets. Don't be afraid, her voice was a melodic whisper, surprisingly clear in the humid air. I am Lyra. He lowered his hand, the pulse pistol heavy and useless. He could sense her concern, a tangible wave of empathy emanating from her. It disarmed him more than any weapon. I'm Noah, he stammered, his voice raspy. I'm studying the blight. She stepped closer, her movements fluid and graceful. The emerald death, she corrected, her voice tinged with sorrow. It spreads like a whisper through the vines, a consequence of imbalance. Her gaze fell upon the infected samples, her eyes clouding with a sadness he understood too well. It was in that shared grief, in the silent acknowledgement of their common enemy, that a fragile bridge formed between them, human and alien, united by a desperate hope for a dying world. He felt a flicker of warmth, a spark of connection he hadn't felt since Earth. It was a dangerous feeling, a distraction, but in that moment, it felt like the only thing worth holding on to. The lum moss forest pulsed with a faint, sickly light. Noah followed Lyra deeper into the alien wilderness, his boots sinking into the soft, silicon-based soil. The air thrummed with an unfamiliar energy, a low hum that resonated in his bones. He glanced at Lyra, her iridescent skin catching the ethereal glow, her vine-like hair swaying gently as she moved with an uncanny grace. He felt a pull towards her, a strange mix of fascination and unease. The whispers grow louder here, Lyra said, her voice barely above a murmur, her multicolored eyes fixed on the path ahead. The vines tell of the emerald death's advance. He nodded, the guilt twisting in his gut. We call it the blight. It's consuming our lum moss, our power source. We're losing ground. Lyra stopped, her hand brushing against a thick, pulsating vine. The vine glowed brighter, its light flowing up her arm, illuminating her face with an otherworldly radiance. The vines speak of imbalance, she said softly. A disruption in the flow of Ethel's life force. He hesitated. We're trying to understand your biotechnology. To adapt it. To survive. The words felt clumsy, inadequate. He wanted her to understand, to see that his people weren't invaders, just survivors. Just like her. Survival is a powerful drive, she said, her voice laced with understanding, her gaze searching his. But it must not come at the cost of balance. The aethery and Ethel are one. To harm one is to harm both. Her words echoed his own fear, the fear of repeating the mistakes of Earth. He saw a flash of his sister, her face pale and drawn in the final days of the plague. He pushed the image away, his jaw tightening. We don't want to harm Ethel. We need it, just as you do. She turned to him, her eyes, now a deep violet, locking onto his. A shiver ran down his spine. There might be a way, she whispered, her voice filled with a strange mixture of hope and sorrow. A symbiotic organism, held within my people for generations. It has the power to heal, but it is a delicate balance. Used incorrectly, it could destroy the very essence of Ethel. Her words ignited a spark of hope, but also a deep unease. A cure, but at what cost? He felt the weight of his responsibility, the lives of his people resting on his shoulders. He reached out, his hand hovering just above her arm, the light from the vine dancing between their skin. He hesitated, unsure if his touch would be welcome, if it might even harm her. Her skin felt surprisingly smooth, warm to the touch. A current seemed to pass between them, a faint tingling sensation. He pulled back quickly, his cheeks flushing. Lyra tilted her head, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. We are not so different, Noah, she murmured. Life flows through us all, in different forms, yet connected. He looked away, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to focus, to understand this symbiotic organism, to find a way to save his people without destroying hers. But in the depths of his heart, a different seed was taking root, a fragile hope for something more than just survival. A hope for connection, for understanding, for something that felt like home. The sickly yellow glow of the blight intensified, its tendrils creeping closer to the human settlement's perimeter. Panic spread like wildfire through the cramped corridors of the repurposed hydroponics station. Some of the colonists, hardened by the loss of Earth and the desperate struggle for survival on Ethel, demanded aggressive action. Burn it out, one shouted, brandishing a repurposed mining laser. Before it consumes us all. Noah stood firm, blocking their path. We can't. It'll destabilize the entire platform. We'll lose the remaining Lummos, our only power source. He looked around at their faces, etched with fear and desperation, mirroring his own internal struggle. Lyra's words echoed in his mind, a warning and a plea, balance. But how could he balance the needs of his people against the preservation of Ethel? He found Lyra at the edge of the platform, her luminous eyes fixed on the encroaching blight. The usually vibrant colors of her skin seemed muted, reflecting the decay spreading through the vines. He reached out, his hand hovering just inches from her arm, unsure if his touch would comfort or offend. He hesitated, then gently placed his hand on her shimmering skin. It felt surprisingly warm, a pulse of energy thrumming beneath his fingertips. He pulled back quickly, a blush rising in his cheeks. Lyra met his gaze, her eyes shifting to a deep, sorrowful violet. They fear what they don't understand, she whispered, her voice strained. They see only the threat, not the delicate balance that sustains us all. He nodded, the weight of his responsibility pressing down on him. He had to make a choice. He could appease his people, authorize the burning, and risk devastating Ethel's ecosystem. Or he could trust Lyra, gamble on an unknown solution, and face the wrath of his own kind. The symbiotic organism, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Tell me more. Lyra's eyes flickered with a complex mixture of hope and fear. It resides within me, she said, placing her hand on her chest, just above where a human heart would be. A legacy passed down through generations. It can restore balance, heal the emerald death. But it is a powerful force, one that could be misinterpreted. Misused. The fear in her voice mirrored his own. He could see the reflection of his own guilt in her eyes. He knew then, with a certainty that defied logic, that he had to trust her. Suddenly, a tremor shook the platform. Shouts erupted from the human settlement. A section of Lummos, consumed by the blight, collapsed, plunging a section of the platform into darkness. Chaos erupted. They're going to burn it, Lyra said, her voice urgent. They won't wait. Noah's heart hammered in his chest. He knew she was right. Despair threatened to overwhelm him. Then, Lyra did something unexpected. She reached out, her hand grasping his. The contact sent a jolt of energy through him, a strange mix of warmth and fear. "I believe in you, Noah," she said, her eyes shining with an intensity that burned away his doubt. "I believe in humanity. I will show them." Before he could react, she was gone, disappearing into the network of vines, a streak of iridescent light against the encroaching darkness. He stared after her, his heart pounding, a mixture of fear and awe washing over him. She was risking everything, for him, for his people. He wouldn't let her down. He knew what he had to do. The air crackled with tension. Fear mingled with the scent of ozone as the repurposed mining lasers powered up, casting harsh shadows across the panicked faces of the colonists. Noah pushed his way through the crowd, his heart pounding against his ribs. He had to reach the command center, override the firing sequence, buy Lyra time. He burst through the door, his breath catching in his throat. Captain Ilara, her face grim, stood before the main console, her hand hovering over the activation button. "They are not listening, Noah," she said, her voice tight with desperation. "The blight is spreading too fast. We have to act." "No." He slammed his hand on the console, the metal cool against his burning skin. "Lyra has a solution. We have to trust her." Ilara's eyes flashed with anger. "Trust an Aetheri? After what they did? They didn't do anything." The words burst from him, fueled by a protectiveness he hadn't realized he felt. "The blight is a consequence of our actions, of the imbalance we created. Lyra is trying to help us fix it." He saw a flicker of doubt in Ilara's eyes, a momentary crack in her resolve. It was enough. He reached out, his hand covering hers on the console. The contact startled her, but she didn't pull away. "We have to believe in something, Ilara," he pleaded, his voice raw with emotion. "Believe in her. Believe in us." He saw the memory of Earth flicker in her eyes, the same pain, the same loss. It was a shared history, a shared burden. It was what bound them together, what gave them the strength to keep fighting. Ilara closed her eyes, her hand tightening under his. He felt a tremor run through her, the weight of command, the fear of failure. Then, she opened her eyes, a new resolve hardening her gaze. She pulled her hand away, her voice firm. "Give me 5 minutes, Noah. 5 minutes to convince them. If Lyra doesn't show, we burn." Noah found Lyra at the heart of the Lummoss forest, her shimmering form almost invisible against the dying glow. He reached her, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "They've agreed to wait," he said, his voice hoarse. "But not for long." Lyra turned to him, her luminous eyes filled with a sorrow that mirrored his own. "The Aetheri elders resist. They see your technology as a threat, your presence as an imbalance. They fear the symbiotic organism will fall into the wrong hands." "Then show them," he pleaded, his hand reaching out, hovering just above her arm, hesitant to touch, yet needing to connect. "Show them that we can work together. Show them that we are not the enemy." A tremor ran through the vines, stronger than before. Alarms blared from the human settlement. Lyra's eyes widened. "They're attacking," she whispered, her voice laced with urgency. "The elders, they've misinterpreted your preparations. They believe you're going to destroy the Lummoss forest." Terror gripped him. He had to stop them, had to prevent a catastrophe. But how could he reach them, explain, when he didn't even understand their language, their ways? Lyra placed her hand on his, the touch sending a jolt of energy through him. "I will go," she said, her voice filled with a quiet determination. "I will show them I trust you. I trust humanity." Before he could protest, she was gone, her iridescent form disappearing into the pulsating network of vines, a single spark of light against the encroaching darkness. He watched her go, his heart pounding in his chest, a mixture of fear and awe washing over him. She was risking everything, her life, her people's trust, for him. He had to make it worth it. He raced back to the settlement, the alarm screaming in his ears. He burst into the command center, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're attacking. It's a misunderstanding. We have to stop them." Ilara looked at him, her face pale, the fear palpable in the air. The lasers were primed, ready to fire. "How?" she whispered, her voice filled with despair. "I don't know," he admitted, his mind racing. "But we have to try." He looked at the console, at the intricate network of connections, human technology intertwined with Ethel's bioluminescent vines. An idea sparked, a desperate gamble. He had to bridge the gap, create a connection, not of technology, but of understanding. He reached out, his hand hovering over the console, his mind filled with Lyra's image, her trust, her courage. He took a deep breath, his fingers brushing against the pulsating vines integrated into the control panel. He closed his eyes, focusing on the connection, the shared energy, the shared fear, the shared hope. He opened his mouth and began to speak, not in human words, but in the language of Ethel, the language of the vines, the language of life itself, a language he didn't know he knew, a language whispered to him by Lyra, by the very heart of Ethel. The words flowed, not from his mind, but from somewhere deeper, a resonance with the living vines pulsing beneath his fingertips. A wave of energy surged through him, flowing outwards, a beacon of understanding, of shared fear, of shared hope. The alarms quieted, the harsh glare of the lasers dimmed. On the main view screen, the Aether, poised to attack, paused, their bioluminescent weapons flickering uncertainly. Ilara stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. He had done it. He had spoken to them, not with words, but with the very essence of Ethel. Lyra appeared beside him, her hand finding his, her touch sending a wave of warmth through his exhausted body. "You spoke to them," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "You spoke the language of the vines." He looked at her, the relief washing over him in a dizzying wave. "You taught me," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Without even knowing it. Together, they addressed both the human colonists and the Aether elders, explaining the misunderstanding, the shared threat, the shared hope. The tension slowly dissipated, replaced by a cautious optimism. The Aether elders, swayed by Lyra's trust in Noah and his people, agreed to work together. The symbiotic organism, carefully cultivated and adapted by Noah and Lyra, was integrated into the Lummos network. It spread like a wave of healing light, pushing back the emerald blight, restoring balance to the ecosystem. The human settlement, powered by the revitalized Lummos, hummed with renewed life. In the quiet moments that followed, amidst the celebration and the relief, Noah and Lyra found solace in each other's presence. They walked hand in hand through the rejuvenated Lummos forest, the air filled with the soft glow of healing, the whispers of the vines now a song of life, not death. "It's beautiful," Noah murmured, his voice filled with wonder. He looked at Lyra, her iridescent skin shimmering in the ethereal light, her eyes, now a gentle emerald, reflecting the renewed life of Ethel. He reached out, his fingers brushing against her cheek, his touch hesitant, yet filled with a tenderness he hadn't realized he possessed. Lyra leaned into his touch, her eyes closing, a soft sigh escaping her lips. "It is a new beginning," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "A woven future, created together." He leaned in, drawn to her like a moth to a flame, his lips brushing against hers. The kiss was tentative, a question and an answer, a promise and a prayer, a bridge between two worlds, two species, two hearts. It was a kiss that held the weight of shared loss, of shared hope, of a shared future yet to be written. But the peace was fragile. Whispers of dissent rippled through both the human and Aether communities. Some humans saw Lyra as a threat, a reminder of their dependence on an alien world. Some Aether viewed Noah with suspicion, distrustful of human intentions, wary of the power of their technology. One evening, as Noah and Lyra stood at the edge of the platform, gazing at the swirling nebula painting the alien sky, Ilara approached them, her face etched with concern. "The council wants to meet," she said, her voice grave. "They're questioning your relationship with Lyra. They fear it compromises our position, our independence." Noah felt a cold dread creep into his heart. He looked at Lyra, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and defiance. He knew what he had to do. "I'm not going back," he said, his voice firm, his gaze locked on Lyra's. "Not without you. This is my home now. We'll build it together." Lyra's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise, then a deep, abiding love shining in their depths. She reached out, her hand finding his, her touch a silent promise. The council meeting was tense, accusations flew, old prejudices resurfaced. Noah stood his ground, defending his love for Lyra, his commitment to Ethel, his belief in a shared future. He spoke of the sacrifices both he and Lyra had made, the risks they had taken, the trust they had built. He spoke of Earth, of the plague, of the lessons learned, of the mistakes he wouldn't repeat. He spoke of the beauty of Ethel, of the wisdom of the Aethery, of the strength they could find in unity. He spoke of Lyra, of her courage, her compassion, her love. In the end, the council, swayed by his passion, his sincerity, and the undeniable evidence of the thriving ecosystem around them, relented. They agreed to a tentative alliance, a cautious step towards a shared future. But the path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges, with the echoes of past mistakes and the whispers of future conflicts. Yet, as Noah and Lyra stood hand in hand, gazing at the vibrant, interwoven tapestry of human and ethery life flourishing on Ethel, they knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that their love, fragile yet enduring, was a beacon of hope in the vast, unforgiving expanse of the galaxy. It was a whisper, a promise, a woven future, waiting to unfold.